Betting, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the Bet with the Best podcast. Its mission is to explore better ways to bet on races, to seek out new, successful players, and to boldly go where no podcast has gone before. The Bet with the Best podcast is sponsored by Amwager, an ADW built by horse players for horse players. Speed, power, and ease of use are at the core of Amwager, designed to give players the information and tools they need to quickly make anything from a simple win bet to a complex, structured superfecta or pick 5 wager. When you combine that with data and pool updates that are up to 60 times faster than the competition, Amwager is the clear winner in wagering on races online. Those are just a few of the many special features that Amwager has to offer, along with live video and race replays, free, integrated form-to-win past performance information, conditional wagering, and true odds, which are a prediction of off odds based on all available pool data. That and much more. Amwager is licensed and operated in the U.S., and best of all, they will actually pay you to play. If you sign up now and deposit and bet $150, you will earn a $150 lump sum bonus. So there is no reason not to give Amwager a try. If you want to bet with the best, then you need the best tools to wager with. You need Amwager. Welcome to episode 27 of the Bet with the Best podcast. In the Sherlock Holmes stories by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, Holmes has a great line. You see, but you do not observe. That sums up what I hope to cover today. We've all seen a lot of races, but most of us don't know how to properly observe the races so that we can detect the important clues that will help us solve the mystery of how to win at this game. Joining us this week is the founder of Trip Note Pros, Ryan Flanders, to talk with us about how to observe a horse race. Welcome to the show, Ryan. How's it going?
It's going great, Chris. I'm taking a much-needed day off. Sunday, I've been grinding away before the Preakness weekend. So, yeah, it's good to be with you always.
Great. Yeah, no races to watch today, huh? You get a break. That's good.
Inevitably, like a total idiot, I'll find myself in front of my computer just watching for funsies. But that'll be about it for me. No work.
All right. Well, before we get into the topic, which we will go into in great depth, and I'm sure you'll provide lots of interesting insights, I do like to start the show off with the guests telling us their Horseplayer origin story, how they got started in this crazy game and how it led to where you are today. So if you would, please share your Horseplayer origin story with the listeners.
Well, my stepdad was a horse trainer. So pretty simple. My mom was a dime. She was pretty hot, and she married an older guy named Michael Fromm, who was a horse trainer. He was more than 20 years older than my mom. And he trained horses down at Agua Caliente. So, not many people that I know these days even know what Caliente was, but it was a super cool racetrack down in Tijuana. And I got tossed into the back of a pickup truck when I was super young, and we drove down to the track every weekend. So from the time I was about 4 until probably, maybe 10 or 11, where my parents, my mom, my stepdad thought I was okay to be left home alone, which they were wrong, but they thought it was okay to be left home alone. I went down there every weekend with them to TJ. So it was fun. Grew up on the backside. Actually, Michael was partners with the late, great Charlie Whittingham. So he was a super good trainer. They he did a lot of work for Old English Rancho. They shipped down a lot of horses that they just wanted black type for. So they would run like these $25,000 stakes down there, and they would pick those off. And then a lot of those mares ended up being brood mares at Old English Rancho for Bud Johnston. So yeah, that's kind of where I cut my teeth down there. I was a ticket stooper, ran around the apron and picked up tickets and rolled up my program and whipped and slashed. I was running down the apron when the horses were coming down the stretch in TJ, and went to dog races every now and again. But yeah, my weekends weren't peppered with Little League and stalker so much as they were with cheap claiming races down in Mexico. So it was a good time. Miss it, actually. They had great nachos down there, and I had people running my bets for me, all the waiters. I used to hang out in a place called La Cupola, and I was upstairs and I had a cool bartender and a couple helpers for me would run my bets. I had a little tip sheet, which was kind of cool. When I was like 6 or 7, everyone thought it was cool that I was selling my tip sheet for, $5, and I would make I'd try and roll a show parlay or something throughout the day. So it was fun. It was good times. Miss it a lot, actually.
I've actually been to Agua Caliente, and it was actually one of the nicer tracks in North America at one time, especially during Prohibition, when it was illegal to gamble in the United States. That was sort of the heyday for Agua Caliente.
Yeah, it was cool. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, as you say, yeah. So I remember like super cool things, like you see the movie The Sting, and they've got the chalkboard and they've got the audio of the race. Like I remember they had a sports book down there, not a sports book, but help me out here, where they have, there's different tracks. It's kind of like a little OTB and a big chalkboard, and they would just throw the results up there. So they had all the tracks. I remember, New York and, Kentucky, and they would literally book bets down there. And got some super cool stories about Winning Colors and the Future book down there. I made a little bet on her. My stepdad kicked down the front door after she won because he was going to put 2,000 on her at 100 to 1. And he did the right thing. He paid his help, which he should have done, but he had a long conversation with my mom, and he thought about betting her at 100 to 1 in the Derby. She was 100 to 1 in the Future book, actually leading into the Santa Anita Derby. So, I mean, you want to talk about value, like everyone's looking for value. Yeah, they had some down there, and they took a big hit on her because a lot of people in Southern California obviously were betting on the California horses, and the rest is history. She beat 49er by a neck, and I was excited because I think I had $14 on her, which was a lot for me. So, but he was not happy. And when she hit the wire, I'm jumping for joy, and he kicked down our screen door. I'll never forget it. It was epic.
Well, yeah, before the Kentucky Derby, she crushed the males in the Santa Anita Derby. So she was quite a filly. She was quite a filly. And she almost ended Personal Ensign's undefeated streak. I mean, it was the most desperate stretch run you'll ever see in the Breeders' Cup when Personal Ensign ran her down at the wire. She looked like she was home.
She did. Yeah, that was a good one. I remember that one too. And if not, I mean, she could have won the pre. I think if I remember correctly, Woody Stevens, who trained 49er, said there'll never be a filly to win the Triple Crown, and I'm making sure of it. And he went after her early and buried her in the second leg of the Triple Crown. But yeah, she was special. I mean, I remember it because she made 1,400, so that was a big deal for me.
Yes, that's good. That's 1,400 is a big deal for a lot of people. So anyway, you were degenerate from the start. No, I'm just kidding. How did that eventually, you get more as you got older, got serious at least, and how did it get to the point where you started Trip Note Pros? Well,
I'm admittedly pretty compulsive with things that I do. So when I go after things, I never half-ass them. I really go hard. I played golf for a while. I went from like a 7 handicap to almost a +3. I really decided I want to get good at golf, and I did that. I played college basketball, which I didn't play at Duke. But I did play a decent little school here in San Diego, Point Loma Nazarene Division II, for 5'8" white kid. Not bad. Sorry, you can delete that if you want. Didn't mean to get racial. But yeah, so I just pretty much, I go hard in anything I do. And when I started, I decided to, I was going to make my own trips. It was the same kind of thing where I really said, well, I'm just going to put everything down and be as good as I can at it. It seemed like everything that I was hitting had to do with trip. And so I started making my own trips, and I was putting notes in my formulator, and I ran into some folks that wanted them. And so I started selling my information privately, where I would ship things off, and people would pay me for those notes. Actually, one of the guys, he won the BCBC. He was paying me $500 a card. So, if I was doing, a couple cards a week, that was good. And I had a couple other guys, and somebody had heard me on a podcast and reached out to me and said, "Hey, I want to buy your notes." And I said, "Well, you can't afford them." And he's like, "Well, maybe, maybe not. But I want to buy your notes." So he ended up actually being my marketing guy. His name is Andrew Chacha. And Andrew was like, "Look, I think you should scale these. I think you can sell these." And I said, "Well, the problem is I can't protect them. I don't want to do all the work and then have everything just shipped off and duplicated. And that's why I'll never do that." And he said, "Well, if I can protect it, would you consider doing it?" And I said, "Sure." So he went off and he created something. And I'm like, "Oh, that's pretty cool." So we decided to give it a swing, and we gave away everything for free for a month or two. And I don't remember when this was. I think it was 4 years ago this summer, but I'm not certain. And we had a lot of people sign up. And then when we shut it down and turned on the paywall, we did a survey first. We wanted to see if anybody was actually interested in paying for this stuff. And sure enough, a lot of people stuck around. And so that was kind of just the genesis of Trip Note Pros. And it's been a war ever since. It's been harder than I thought it would be, but I still love it. I love turning on my computer and watching replays and digging into the minutia, and got a good solid customer base now, which is great. Got about 300 guys, a lot of them tournament players. And, they don't buy it every time, but, they buy it enough to where I'm earning a living doing it, and I'm still fat and overweight, which is cool. Haven't missed a meal. And, that's kind of how it started. So here we are.
Yeah, well, I'm one of those guys. So I've used your product, and it's good. So we're going to talk about, you don't trip all the races, and there's some people who maybe like to do it themselves, or want to do it themselves, or want to do it on races they can't. If you don't have the time, like you say, let us do it for you on Trip Note Pros. But if you want to do it yourself, that's what this podcast is all about. We're going to talk about, try to pick your brain on how you watch races, what you look for, how you document it, the whole spiel. So let's get started on that. And first of all, why bother to spend all this time watching races? I mean, what's the value in doing that? You can, there's a lot of people who've been playing the races for years and have never, really, at least not in a systematic way, watch races. So what's the value? Why do it?
Well, man, there's so much to uncover about a horse. I mean, nothing is baked into the price in a trip. Or I shouldn't say that, but most of what is seen on the track in a trip is not baked into the price. And in 2024, there's almost nothing that you can do that's not baked into that price. I have a little bit of knowledge on that because I had a couple conversations with a group that wanted to incorporate trips into their models. Passed on that, but almost everything's baked into the price. Speed figures baked into the price. Speed in general baked into the price. There's nothing you're going to see on paper that's not baked into the price. So if you're an extremely good handicapper and you dive into your PPs, you're still probably at a disadvantage. I equate it to almost like being a sharp blackjack player. You play everything by the book. You do everything right. You're still bucking odds, so it's very difficult. But in trip handicapping, no different than somebody who's maybe an exceptional workout, a clocker who's watching workouts. That subjective information is very difficult to quantify. So these guys, these CAWs, they have models. You have to basically link your information to their system, and they create their own odds. And if you have something that is quantifiable, then they can build the model for it. And I believe that what I do, to the degree that I do it, is not baked into that. I know they have some trip guys. I think I'm better. I think I'm better by a lot, and that offers value. And man, it's just so hard. When I was younger, I'm not going to say it was easy, but I didn't try very hard. And, you could still win and win regularly and turn a profit and make money and have fun while you were doing it. And today it's just so hard. It's so hard. It's really difficult. My handle's gone down as a result, but I'm still good enough to where I can snipe things and do okay. I still enjoy playing contests. But yeah, that stuff it's not always on the board. When you look up, when I see a horse, I go, man, this horse should be 5 or 6 to 1, and he's 15 to 1. I'm looking at the will pays. I know he's still going to be a big number. That's awesome. That never happens today. It's super difficult to find that. But I still find those, and they're still worth taking swings at. And that's why. Mostly about computers today, right? Everything's on the board, and you have to be sharper than everybody. I don't care what you do. If it's clocking, reading the form, if you use a computer, you've got to be better than everybody else. Otherwise, there's really almost no point. The markets are too tight. They're just uber accurate. And in trip handicapping, there's a lot of subjective. And if you're really good at it and you're better than everybody else, which again, I don't want to sound like a jerk, but I think that we are, then you potentially have an edge. So that's the name of the game, having an edge and gaining some value.
Yeah, that's something that many of the previous guests on this podcast have talked about. And I always, my little saying is, if it's in the PPs, it's in the price. And I think that's the point you're making, that a lot of this trip information isn't in the PPs. And that's one way to get an edge in a game where the edges are harder and harder to come by. So it's worth the time. So let's talk about how to get better at it, how to watch races, and kind of give us just the basics on what you look for. And if you could, kind of talk about, what you look for before a race, if, in terms of the pre-race, what you're looking for during a warm-up even, at the very beginning of the race and they break from the gate, what you're looking for during the race, on the turns, in the stretch run, and even after the race when they gallop out or maybe come back to winner's circle, that whole sequence, what is it that you're focused on that you find, important, that's the kind of things that you would take note of and that could, provide an edge in the future?
Yeah, so you're not going to like my answer here, Chris, because a lot of that pre-race stuff, I don't focus on. I just don't have the time. I mean, there's no way to watch multiple tracks pre-race and actually, jot things down and say, this horse was washed out. This horse looked amazing. I know that Maggie does a phenomenal job, and people make notes with what she says on air. Actually heard a couple times people getting into a fight at Saratoga. Hey, shut up! Because Maggie's talking, shut up, because they want to hear what she has to say. I can't do that stuff, right? I don't have the time. It's a lot of pre-race stuff I can't see, which is kind of unfortunate. Sometimes every once in a while, I'll see a horse gallop out real well, and I'll let the tape roll if they have it. And I'll try and get a glimpse of what that horse's gait looks like coming back to be unsaddled or have his picture taken. And it's interesting. Some horses kind of, they're tired and they sulk and it takes them a while to get back. And then others, they'll sprint back. And I'm like, man, that one maybe has a little bit deeper tank. I don't note those things at Trip Note Pros because, if I go that in depth, I almost become a victim of the success because people expect it. I used to write very in-depth race notes. So I'll make, I used to basically list which races were strong, or, flow dynamics, horses that were coming back winning. And I'm like, you know what? I mean, I had to get away from it because I was spending so much time. I would spend 5+ hours writing race notes for one card. And that was just too much. So I had to back it down. And what you're talking about now kind of gets into that same thing with pre-race stuff. And, if I see a horse that acts up in the gate beforehand, I'll make note of it. And a lot of them are, they're moving around a little bit. Don't make any notes of that. But if a horse, is clearly, antsy and is making mental mistakes in the gate, I'll make notes of that because that's important. That's almost like, that's stress, right? So that stress gets your heart rate up and it burns fuel. So that's important to know and people need to know about it. A lot of times that's noted in the PPs, which is good. And they don't, you can't see it. That's one of the few things that I think chart callers do right that I can't see is, when they're on site, they might make notes of those things and I can't. So again, you're not going to like the answer, but I don't do a whole lot of that pre-race, post-race stuff.
Well, that's fine. So let's talk about, what you're looking at in during the start of the race, during the race. What parts of the race do you focus on? What are you looking for? What are, that kind of stuff.
So the most important thing to me is the break. If you had to pick one segment of the race that was the most important, it would be the break and like the first furlong. Because that sets the tone for the rest of the race. So I like to take a mental note of the results of the race beforehand. So I get to the race, I click on the results. I just make a mental note. This race finished 5.83. I watch the head on for the first furlong. And then I'll toggle back to the pan shot. And depending on the track where some of the production dynamics are just absolutely pitiful, like Gulfstream, I may have to watch the head on almost the whole way around because they only give you like 6 lengths on the pan shot. But I'll memorize those results and I'll watch the race. And what's kind of interesting to do is to fast forward the race and watch it that way, knowing the results, and you get a very good idea of flow dynamics. So I might watch the race at like hyperspeed, where it takes me like 15 seconds, 20 seconds to watch the entire race. And you can see where the horses are coming from and how they got into the race and why they finished where they did, which is cool. And then when you go back and watch the race, you're like, okay, it starts to paint a pretty cool picture. But yeah, I'll memorize those results. I'll know ahead of time what the pace was like. Created a super cool database. It's actually pretty awesome. Where I'll do the work ahead of times in terms of the pace, everybody knows that pace makes the race, right? So if I said pace makes the, you'd say race. Everybody knows that. And it's crazy how few people, how few handicappers use that and study it really well, because it's so important. It's the most underrated saying in horse racing. Pace makes the race. Everybody knows it, but nobody does the homework on pace. And a lot of the tournament players do, and they get it. And I think that's why a lot of people that are playing tournaments trust our information, because I use two different things to assess pace. And I think the pace is pretty accurate and the flow dynamics are tight and they're accurate. And that kind of information is huge, but I can't tell you how many times I'm on air, or not on air, but I'm listening to people talk, and they start talking about race pace, so, the pace of the race, and they're just flat out wrong. They're just flat out wrong, and they're feeding just terrible information to the public. And unless you're paying attention to run up and rail positions, wind even, and then you have, so I like US time form. Happy to plug Milkowski's stuff. He's unbelievable. Like, if you were ever going to pay for anything aside from what I do, go to Trip Mill Pros. He's amazing, because the pace and flow dynamics are critical to figuring out the very subtle stuff where you may not have a trouble line, but races run upside down and things like that. I'm rambling now, but it happens all the time. You're at Churchill Downs, the run-up's 180 feet, and you've got a skilled track announcer saying, and they ripped through an opening quarter in 21-3. No, they didn't. They didn't rip through the opening quarter. That's a common fraction at Churchill Downs. There's 180 feet of run-up. They trip the beam. They're running 41.5 miles an hour. There's a tailwind. And that's why the half-mile time is always very slow there. And Craig Milkowski and the U.S. Timeform guys pick up on it. And it might show up as a slow pace. But then you go on air, you're watching the live feed, and they might say, oh, they went fast. No, they didn't go fast in that race. But if you don't know that, if you're not really paying attention to the pace, you're completely fooled. What you think is true is false, and what is false is true. You have no chance at that point. No chance, because your entire tote board is wrong based on the horse that you're looking at and the trip that he had in his previous race, or maybe a more applicable race, the race before, or what have you. So in terms of trip handicapping, I really, if I had one thing to focus on, it would be pace and flow dynamics. So moving back to what I was talking about before, I memorize the results. I might get the fast forward. I watch the head on for a furlong. I want to see how a horse might react when his path is taken. If he's a closer, how he reacts. And then I assess pace, and there's all kinds of different things that I look for during the race that, moving into a fast pace or what have you, just one example. But that's where it starts for me, is I want to get an idea of the pace and flow as I'm watching that race.
So one thing you said is really interesting. I actually have done this before too, is the if you speed up the race, it kind of looks more like a flow, right? You kind of see the flow and high speed that you don't when it's going slow. And in fact, so that is kind of interesting. So I just wanted to reinforce that, because I've done the same thing. And like you said, just the first thing you do is just kind of get a sense for how did the race kind of unfold and finish up. So that's interesting. So can you maybe talk about the importance of pace and flow? How do you incorporate that into how you evaluate a horse's trip and what you take note of? Can you give some more details or examples about that?
Yeah, of course. So so it depends on the surface, right? So dirt races, they typically descend in velocity as the race progresses, right? So closers a lot of times aren't really closing. The leaders are just backing up. They're slowing down at a lesser rate than the speed horses, right? That's typical of dirt races, right? That's the norm. Turf races can do anything. They can run like dirt races, but they also run upside down, and there's like huge fluctuations in pace and flow that go on in turf racing. They run what I call upside down, right? So they might start slow, finish fast. That's why you get these horses just flying home. It's about turn of foot. It's about trying to stay covered up. And so there, as far as the dirt go, here's a great example of dirt, a flow dynamic in dirt that US Timeform, and anybody that uses US Timeform, check it out. Like, this is gold. Because dirt races typically back up, right? You get leaders that are just slowing down, and you get the closers that run them over or don't based on the pace. If that race runs upside down, even just a smidge, it becomes almost, it could be, I'm not going to say impossible, but it's much more difficult for the stretch runners to perform well, right? So if you have a race that runs evenly or runs a little bit upside down, closing is hard because typically the closers are closing because leaders are backing up. And when the leaders do not back up because of the pace and the flow, that running line looks bad. And it may not be. That horse may still be running better later, but they've covered a little bit more ground because they're trying to go around horses that aren't tired, and their performance line doesn't look good. And that's one of the reasons why you find value in trip handicapping, is because those running lines that don't look good, there's nothing wrong with those running lines. It's just things didn't cut their way. Speed figures have their place. I'm not a speed figure guy, but they do I do believe they have their place. But it's almost impossible to run a big figure with a bad trip. You're just not going to see it unless you're a super horse like Flightline, who was troubled and he ran through everything. He was troubled, when he won 7/8 at Santa Anita. He was troubled a ton in the Met Mile, and he just still ran through those, and he posted big figures. That doesn't happen, like, ever. That's why people, he ran this number. Screw the number. Screw the number. I mean, everybody's all high and mighty on fierceness. Look, fierceness can win. He could win if he had a good trip, but every time he's had a good trip, he's posted a big figure. When things haven't cut his way, he's proven he has a glass jaw. He's not going to post a good figure. And that's all that's what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to find who's going to run the fastest. And if you didn't have a good trip, and then moving forward, who is going to have the better trip, those horses are going to post the best figures. That's why, I'm kind of, I used to use them a little bit. I almost don't use them at all anymore, because I'm trying to find horses that had good trips that I can downgrade and say, you know what? Everything cut his way. Is he this fast? He can be. But if things don't go his way again, he probably won't be. He probably won't be as good. So, the pace and flow is huge. And in turf, for example, I've got some terms I've kind of coined. I might have a fake fast pace, which is where you get a runoff leader. Like, let's say you're looking in the PPs and you see a running line that says 4th by 8, the running line might say 4th by 8, 4th by 9, 3rd by 5, whatever, 2nd by 5, 2nd by 4, something like that. And you watch the race and you go, wow, there was a runoff leader in this race, but this horse was 4th and he was with the outer flow, and he's 2 or 3 wide on the backstretch. And while every pace dynamic that shows up might be fast, there's actually a race being run within a race, which is the horse that's in second has a measured lead versus the other horses. And the pace might actually be slow. And that horse with the outer flow that is trying to come slightly off the pace and he's moving wide with that flow, that actually might be a terrible trip because the pace might actually be slow and he's caught with the outer flow. So, you know, things like that where you can identify a fake fast pace is not going to show up on paper, right? Anything on paper, any computer dynamic, any model might go, that pace was fast. This horse had an advantage. That's not true. That's not true. You have an edge there, in my opinion, because the analytics are going to say he had a good trip when in fact he did not. He actually had a bad trip. Especially what if he's in last and with the outer flow, if you want to take it to the nth degree, and there's a runoff leader, and now there's a gapped leader. So the gapped leader's screwed. He's in a terrible spot because he's seen as the target. He's probably going to move too early, and he's in a bad spot. And then the correct horse in line is the horse that's closest to the gap leader on the inside typically. But now if you're in last and with the outer flow, and everything says, oh, the pace is super fast, he's actually probably fighting a slow pace because the real leaders are in third and fourth. And, you know, he's stuck wide on a slow pace, which is kind of weird. So that'd be a fake fast pace. Those are interesting. These flow dynamics on turf can get kind of weird like that. I have a term I use called accordion flow. I talked about earlier the fast forwarding of the race, where you get a pace that maybe is normal or it's maybe even a little bit quick early and the field's strung out, but then you've got a leader that backs down the pace and the field crunches together and he gets a breather and then he stretches everybody out again at the far turn, which typically is a nice advantage. It's not huge, but it's a nice advantage for the leaders, because when that field crunches together, traffic ensues. The closers move in. They typically pause just as the field is stretching out again, and then the leaders have an advantage. You know, and they can right the ship a little bit. So you know, I have a term again I use as accordion flow, which is kind of interesting. But those upside down numbers on dirt, they're gold. You might get a very vanilla running line that doesn't look like much, but then maybe moving forward, there's going to be a fast pace and you can completely reverse form, where that form, maybe he's run into 2 upside down races in a row and his form looks kind of muddied. And then, you know, then he finally catches a pace and they back into him and he runs the same race, but the leaders are backing into him. And then you can get a horse upset at a nice price. So things like that are huge. I'm very careful with how I choose my words carefully when it comes to pace. For example, here's a very interesting one. The 2 wide tracking trip on turf. It can be a good trip. It can be an absolute terrible trip. And there are different things that you can do to watch the race to see if it's good or bad. You know, typically on dirt, if you're 2 wide and stalking and you're all by yourself and cozy, that's a beautiful, beautiful thing. Even if the pace is on the quicker side, sometimes that can be a good thing, right? But on turf, it's totally dependent on a few things: who the leader is, and how the flow is lined up behind you. So if you have a good leader in front of you and you're tracking and you're 2 wide, you're kind of dead. It's not, because what's going to happen is you're going to try and work around that horse. And if that horse resists at all, you're in big trouble. Because if you do that all the way around the track, you're chasing multiple lengths at that point. So you have to be clearly better than the leader, which is not easy. And then you start, if you were to take the flow of the race into consideration, I'm going to start to geek out a little bit here, but if the field is lined up and they're not more than 2 wide through the middle stages, and you're tracking, you're in trouble. And the reason why is because the horse that's following you, the second in line, so you've got a stalker and you've got a horse following that stalker. If there's no one out there 3 wide behind that horse, he's going to have to move early or he's going to get trapped. Right? So those riders, they know. They've got peripheral vision. I think they can see it because it happens pretty much every time that horse that's following the tracker, he's going to move early. And that's when you get that big fan out and you get the horse moving early and he pushes that tracker into the leader. And it happens too early in the race, which is a stressful thing for that stalker. If the stalker gets to do what he wants throughout the entire race, it's a good thing. It's a good trip. If he's stalking an inferior horse and nobody moves early, that 2-wide trip, it's a good thing. But if he's stalking a good leader and they're only 2 wide, and then they start, that fan comes, and that fan pushes him into the leader, he's in big trouble. And he's probably not going to perform well. I usually write those notes as, below average, because they are. It's not like this was the worst trip ever. But, it's a disadvantage, but it's worth paying attention to when you're watching races and making your own notes, because those flow dynamics are huge. Now, if you get a horse that's 3 wide following that stalker, guess what? The horse that's 3 wide, he can wait longer. He's going to wait as long as he can. Why? Because he's stuck. He's stuck 3 wide. He doesn't want to move early. And guess what? The horses behind him don't want to move early because he's already 3 wide. They're going to get stuck 4 wide. So if you see a stalker and there's the horse that's behind him is almost less than a length, and it almost forces them to stick 3 wide. A lot of times, not every time, but a lot of times they'll wait because they don't want to move early, and it gives the stalker more time to move on his own, like when he wants to move. But it's the field that lines up, 1 and 2+ wide that really hurts the outside stalker's chances. So there are things like that, and they're everywhere, which is the beauty of trip handicapping. If you know what it is that you're looking for. But if you're like me and you kind of geek out on the stuff and you've watched, I've probably watched, people are going to think I'm lying. I promise you I'm not. I think I've watched over 200,000 races in the last 4 years. Which is why I'm going blind, Chris. But when you geek out on this stuff and you start really paying attention and you start diving into the weeds of what these guys are doing on the track, it starts to paint a totally different picture. It's impossible to handicap the same way when you start geeking out on trip handicapping and seeing the pace and flow dynamics on the track, because the running line in the PPs is deceitful and it starts to look totally different when you dive in and really start handicapping that way.
Well, this is great stuff. So if you have any more of these kind of subtle, good or bad trips, this is the kind of stuff I think is gold. So any more of those kind of examples you want to share, please do.
Well, there's, I like to incorporate jockey intent into all this stuff. Jockey into, you've got to know who your jockey is, what their intentions are. I'm pretty good at it. I can typically watch a race and I can tell you who the jockeys are without actually reading it. And most guys, that's probably not a big deal. I think a lot of people are that way. A lot of these guys have their own, writing style. But I think jockey intent is big. That's a subtle one that anybody can learn and pick up on pretty quickly. For example, I'll give you some, I used to watch races and just, I wouldn't be any wiser when I watched. I'm like, oh, that was weird. Why do you do that? And then I was like, wait a minute. Why am I just, and then I was introspective about my process. I'm like, I literally said that out loud. That was weird. And then I'm like, well, why am I not incorporating that into my handicapping? And what I saw was a jockey at the back of the pack on turf. There's no kickback. None that I could see. Every once in a while you get those clumps that are flying up, but no kickback. And he's detached from the field. He's detached last. And he's running 4 wide through the turn, maybe even wider. And I'm like, that was weird. So I hit the head on. Guy's just sitting there, quiet. I let the tape roll. Race is almost over. He's 100 yards from the wire, and he starts niggling a little bit. And he gets after him a little bit. The horse really flies home. Hey, running line looks terrible. The comment might be, empty, not interested. So the horse didn't do any running. But that was kind of the light bulb moment for me where I was like, you know what? He didn't have to run 4 wide through that turn. He covered more ground on purpose. He did not try. He tried late. He's getting the horse fit. He wants him to finish a little bit. This was a public workout. Sure enough, the horse won next time. He paid $36. He was 17-1. I can't remember the name of the horse, but that was kind of the light bulb moment for me with Jockey Intent, is that they have a plan, and it's your job as, when you're as a handicapper to figure out what it is that you're trying to do. Here's a great way to study Jockey Intent with first timers, right? So if you know your colony and you know how these guys ride early when they're trying to show speed, how they leave the gate, I'm pretty good at it now, where I can say, wow, that was an absolute no try, or yes, he was trying. You get these horses first time out, you hit the head on, and you study the jockey for the first 5+ strides. And you can tell who's trying first time out. You can tell who isn't. Typically, first time out, sprinting on dirt, which is where they usually start their careers. You get the guys that, they're riding away from the gate, but they're not all out for their life away from the gate. They're trying to break clean and earn some position, right? And you can see that. When I was back in the day, when you're running suicides, right? I played basketball, and your coach is like, all right, line up. For whatever reason, you're running a suicide, and you're running 70, 80%. You can tell when who's running 100% right out of the gate. You can tell that guy's trying, that guy's not. It's no different with humans as it is for horses and jockeys. If you see that rider and he is 110% from the blocks and he's hell-bent on earning that forward position, they're probably trying first time out. And it's worth making at least a mental note of it. And conversely, if you get the rider who just doesn't really care, they come away clean, the horse to his left breaks inward, the horse to his outside breaks outward. He's got the cleanest path in the world, and the jockey doesn't send. And you watch the rest of the race, the horse really has, he doesn't show much. You couldn't peg him as a stretch runner, right? He didn't come running like, oh, we're just, he has no speed. He's going to come running. Maybe that was just a no try. Maybe it wasn't, but that's what you're trying to figure out. That's your job as a handicapper is to try and assess that. You're not inside the bubble, those connections. Like, yeah, he's live. We're trying, he's got a big shot. So you're trying to almost get into the paddock and say, hey, look, this one's got a lot of speed. Do your best to make the lead or earn a good spot. And I'll see you in 12 minutes in the winner's circle. You can tell when they're trying and when they're not. So that kind of thing, with Jockey Intent leaving the gate first time out. So, and I love trip notes from the very beginning of a horse's career because it kind of paints a picture of where they're headed, what they want, what their goal is. You know, sometimes you see riders and they're asking after the race. I mean, that's a clear tell. That's why you have to let the tape roll. It's a clear tell that that was not the goal. It doesn't matter that the horse's running line is terrible. It just doesn't. They weren't trying to win that race. You know, that was a public workout. Fierceness was a great tell, actually. I'm trying to think of the race he ran before the Florida Derby. What race is that, Chris? Before the Florida Derby?
Fountain of Youth or Holy Bull? It was either the Holy Bull or the Fountain of Youth. I don't remember which one.
I think it was the Fountain of Youth. It's the one where he broke that. And you can see Johnny V. He breaks a little slow, right? And you watch the pan shot, and there's not a whole lot there other than he broke a little slow, and Johnny is trying to work his way into the clear, right? He wants the forward position, even at the expense of a little bit of a wide trip into the first turn. He's not a little bit, he was wide. But he's willing to burn some fuel to get that forward position. If you watch the head-on that race, it's a huge tell for fierceness because that was the perfect, and this is where you have to start connecting the dots with the handicapping. That was the perfect tell moving into the Derby because he parked in the Florida Derby. But he's already got a pass into the Kentucky Derby, right? He's won the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. He's got the points. He doesn't need to fire a big shot in that race. It was the perfect chance to break a little slow and then take kickback and see if he can pass. Right? If there was ever a race to say, okay, well, if you're the rider and you're the trainer and you get together, and I'm sure they had their discussions moving into that race, what they wanted moving forward. They've got to have a plan, right? The horse broke a little slow. And instead of Johnny V saying, okay, you know what? We don't need this one. This isn't the prize. This isn't the real prize. Let's see if you can take kickback and pass. He didn't do that. You watch the head on, and Johnny V is bullying his way to the outside. He's hemmed in, and he's like, screw you. I can't remember who it is that was hemming him in, but he was bullying his way, pushing and bumping the horse to get to the outside. That is like huge jockey intent. That horse wants no part of taking kickback ever. Because that day should have been the day that he said, you know what, I'm going to sit here. Let's see if he can do it. Let's see if he can improve. Even he could have saved ground by doing it. He wouldn't have been parked, 5, 6 wide, whatever he was. He could have saved ground, taken kickback, and they go, hey, you know what? He did that just fine. They knew that he couldn't do it. They knew that he couldn't do it. And that's why Johnny pushed his way out. And he got glass jawed. He got punched in the face and he folded. And so that to me was a huge negative moving forward, because that jockey intent told me this horse has to be forward. He has to have open air. And if he takes kickback, he's finished. I haven't seen him take it yet, so I don't know. But that is my hypothesis, is that horse will fold like a lawn chair. And so at that point, it's all about the pace dynamic for him. If he gets what he wants up front, he'll fire big. And if he doesn't, he's going to get punched in the face and he's going to fall. And that's what happened to him in the Derby. He got caught up, moving too fast, and he was uncovered. But it would have been great to know, had he broke, a little bit slow, or maybe they wanted to tuck. Yeah, we're going too fast. I'm going to try and tuck in and maybe make him. That didn't happen. So it's stuff like that. First time out, watch the jockeys, what they're trying to do on the track. Like Fierceness is a good one. Tappa Trice would have been a good one last year. I think it was last year. My brain is mush with the replays, but some horses can take kickback, some can't. He's another one where Saez, the horse started climbing and he just was hell bent on reaching open air, all over him, just showering on him to get to the outside. I got to get you out here, buddy. I'm sorry, but we're burning some fuel to get there. And he'll do whatever he can to get to the open air. So that's why it's like Tappa Trice has no shot, auto toss, 20 horse field. He doesn't have enough speed. I know he's taking kickback. He's an auto toss. A lot of people liked him. I'm like, man, that horse, I wouldn't bet him with Monopoly money. And it was all based on jockey intent and the horse's comfort level. But you start combining those things, none of it shows up on paper. Running line might look good. But he did it every time. Even when he won, I can't remember. I think it might have been the Tampa Bay Derby, one of those Tampa preps where he won. Like, he was taking kickback. He hated it, and he was driven through it the whole race. And he finally got there. But, it wasn't the Derby. Those were inferior horses, and he barely got there. So, jockey intent's a big one for me. Just got to know what it is that you're looking for. Every once in a while, I'll see something. I'm like, man, that didn't make any sense at all. And then you just kind of have to be introspective. And sometimes I talk to myself. I'm like, what's this guy doing? Like, literally, what is he trying to do? And you're like, oh, okay, that makes sense. But I've seen riders, they'll be in last, and the horse that's in next to last is detached. And he's following that horse right behind him. That makes like zero sense. You see a jockey that's in last, and you'll see this in Florida a lot. And it's one of the reasons why I love tripping Florida, because these guys, look, they're humans. I'm not going to go down this rabbit hole too far, but if let's just say you weren't trying and you were in last, and the horse that was in front of you had 5 lengths to reach the pack, why would you run off heels behind another horse? That makes zero sense. I mean, that's dangerous. What if the horse in front of you takes a bad step? I mean, I like oxygen. I like to breathe. Don't you, Chris? If I'm a jockey, why would I be drafting behind the next to last horse right off of heels? I mean, unless you're potentially, quote unquote, giving a horse a race, right? Today's not the goal. He's not fit or whatever. This is as colorful as I can say it without saying what I want to say, but those kinds of things with jockey intent are big, and you can't find them unless you do all the work, because these things do not happen all the time. 90% of the trips are vanilla, and you're not going to find a lot, and that's okay. That's part of the process. You have to be willing to say, yep, nothing was there. I couldn't find anything. If something is there, I just wasn't good enough to see it, and that's okay. But it's the ones that you do, and that's what I mentioned about, kind of being a sniper. Then you can kind of snipe and go, okay, I'm gonna take a little swing here, because the board, I know that I'm gonna be right more than one time in 20, and the horse is 21, and then you can snipe a little bit and gain some value. So yeah, jockey intent, horse comfort, all super, super important. And those things don't show up in running lines. And chart callers sure as hell don't find them. That's for sure.
So any more examples on either the horse comfort or jockey intent? And on the jockey intent, in terms of behavior and in the stretch run, is it pretty much all before that that you need to detect it, or are there things you can find, once they turn for home and they head for the wire?
Well, yeah. So, I'll start with, you'll have to remind me here on the jockey intent, but as far as horse comfort goes, I will watch you stare at one horse all the way around the track. Have a good idea of pace dynamic, a flow dynamic before you start watching that race. And you're in a good place, and just stare at that horse all the way around the track, every jump. And you can tell, you get an idea, you get a sense of that horse's gait, his rhythm, if he's performing well. If you can see them bobble every now and again, maybe he's getting a little tired, but you get a very good understanding of that horse's gait. And you can see them climbing. It might be tough if you're not good at it. It may take you a little while, but the minute that horse starts climbing, you need to pay attention to that, because that's stress, and that stress burns fuel. So maybe they don't lose ground. It doesn't matter. That horse's heart rate went up. Interesting. So Scotty Scheffler just got arrested recently. Everyone knows the story, right? So he gets arrested. What's interesting is I read an article about him, and he was talking about how he was trying to slow his heart rate so that he could perform well when he got back to the golf course, because he's amped up, right? He just got arrested. And these professional golfers, I don't know if anyone's ever noticed, but I kind of pay attention to this because I used to play golf. You used to see golfers celebrate. They make a birdie or an eagle, and you see Tiger, and he gets that uppercut, and he's jacked up. They don't do that anymore, because they know that if their heart rate goes up, they're in a bad place. They're burning energy. It burns your mental capacity. It's just a bad thing. So they literally are trying to slow their heartbeat. And Tiger was amazing at it. The guy, he would free dive. I mean, the guy hold his breath for 2.5, 3 minutes. And he had trained himself to slow his heartbeat. When a horse is getting showered with kickback and he starts climbing, horses aren't slowing their heartbeat intentionally. They're burning fuel. So whether or not they're pushed to run through it or not, typically the horses that are being pushed to run through it are being pushed because they're starting to lose ground. And that jockey is merely trying to stop the bleeding. But if you get the guy who's just sitting there, he's quiet, like, okay, you're doing this on your own. Let's see if you can get through this. And the horse is climbing. He's still burning fuel, even though he's not losing ground. How much fuel? I don't know. That's for the handicapper to try and assess. But you have to make note of it. So when I watch that horse run all the way around the track, especially on dirt, and obviously with closers that are trying to remain covered up and take the shortest way around the track, you can see it. It's amazing what you can uncover when you watch every stride. And if you don't, you're cheating yourself. Don't even bother doing it. Don't waste your time. If you're going to watch half the race, I'll do it for you. You're just going to have to pay me. I digress. I can't remember the second part of your question.
The jockey intent part. Trying to detect the jockey intent in the stretch run. Is there anything to look for?
Oh, the jockey intent in the stress. Yeah. So, you'll see a lot of stuff on Twitter about jockeys not trying in the stretch. I think most of it is nonsense. I'll look. Some guys will give up when they know they're not, their horse is spent. You're not on that horse. You can't feel it. You can't hear that horse breathing. I don't believe these guys are showing their hands early and trying to win and then coasting in. So a lot of that stuff. I mean, we all know the riders that tend to give up early and they coast late. Even that coasting high rate of speed, even though they're descending, a lot of times you might see a horse get beat, a half a length or a neck for a minor placing, and everyone freaks out like, oh, he didn't try and he stiffed. 99 times out of 100, that's total nonsense. Paco is that way, for example. But I don't, to me, that's just a guy allowing a horse his lungs back and he's just tired. And if he whips and slashes, he's probably not going to do any better than he would otherwise. And frankly, a tired horse, if you beat him up trying to run a neck faster, you know, I think you're potentially at risk. You know, horses that are tired, like, look, it's not a big deal to me. The jockey intent, where I'm looking at a guy who, here's a good one. You guys want to go watch a funny replay? Go watch Christmas Surprise on debut. Xmas Surprise. And talking about jockey intent, you get a guy that he drags his horse out in the middle of the track and he jogs in and you lose him. You don't see him anymore on the pan shot. You got to watch the head on. You watch the head on, and I think this is the right horse. You can literally see the horses. He's eased in the race, and he's crossing the wire. He's out in the middle of the track, and the horse's ears are pricked. Now that's funny to me, because the horse is saying, "I'm fine. I'm happy as a clam," and he's literally just like, "Oh, what are we doing here? I guess we're done." And he had a decent spot, and the jockey hadn't spent a penny, and he was eased. And so that's something in the stretch where I'll look on the head on, and I'll combine the two, the jockey intent and the comfort of the horse. Jockey was like, okay, I gotta take care of this horse. And the horse said, "I'm just fine, Joel. I'm just fine." And he was an autoplay for me in start number 2, and he got beat a neck, I think, at like 60-1. You know, so those kinds of things, like, I didn't think I was going to get that number. I was actually thinking, man, am I that wrong with this horse that I thought they didn't try and that he didn't try first time out? That he's completely, he's bet like he has 0.0 chance on the tote. But then afterwards, I just started laughing. I'm like, man, 60-1 was enough. And I missed. I bet the win only, and I played a small pick 3, and I missed everything. But those kinds of things. There's a couple guys. I shouldn't be naming names. I'm going to stop doing that. But there's a couple guys that I believe do this often, and 99.5% of all rides, I think they get into the starting gate with the intention of winning. But there are a couple guys for me where I'm like, you know what, I pay extra close attention to, and I don't believe that they, when they never ask for anything, and the horse I know hasn't taken a deep breath, he looks comfortable. I'm very big on a rider's hands. Palms up, palms down, elbows out, elbows in, how they're riding that horse. If you see a jockey whose elbows are tucked in and his palms are down, he hasn't asked that horse for a penny. It's when you need to curl, almost like you're lifting a barbell. Horses, they're heavy, they're strong animals. And if you need to turn those palms sideways or even up to hold that horse back, that's when the elbows start to come in. When their palms go up, they're almost, they're reserving that horse a little bit. But if you see, there's a handful of guys, probably 3 or 4, where I pay extra close attention to, because they will quote unquote give horses races, and that is just as a horse player, that's a beautiful thing. I know it's not the greatest situation, but those are almost auto plays for me, because I don't care what the PPs look like moving forward. I may have to chase them a couple times, but I think they have a bigger plan than I can uncover, and I'm just going to follow them a little bit. But you can see it in the stretch. They're just not trying. They take their horses out in the middle of the track, and they almost leave the camera. And that's what really ticks me off about the production in horse racing is there's no good gallop out views aside from California. That's it. Santa Anita does a great job. Los Alamitos does a great job. Delmar does a good job. You go to New York and you're going to get zoom in on nose hair. You know, if you want to get a good view of a horse's nose hair, then go watch Naira racing. Same thing in Florida. It's just pitiful production. They zoom in on the leaders. You can almost see the camera go fuzzy for a little bit because the guy's trying to like get as close as he can without trying to stay in focus. I'm thinking to myself, what are you doing? There's 12 horses in this race, and we want to see all of them gallop out. And I want to see that jockey back there. You hit the head on zooming in, you know, and you only get like 5 paths from the rail. So it's hard to do. But when you're watching those, and I'm huge on gallop outs, to study these guys. It's not rocket science. When they're trying. You can see it, like the suicide. I coached a little bit too after, before I went off and played hoops. I coached for a year, and you could tell which kids are trying and which aren't. Same thing with jockeys, same thing with horses. You can just see it. You just have to be intellectual about it. Horse players are lazy human beings. Don't be lazy. If you're going to spend the time to watch the replay, be introspective and intellectual about what it is that you're watching. Stare at the horse, stare at the jockey. There's a story to be told there, and it's not showing up on the tote board, I promise you. Not nearly as much as all the other stuff.
So on the gallop outs, when you do get a chance to see them, what are you looking for there?
The gallop outs, I've actually got a video on my site. So if you haven't, a lot of people don't even know it's there because I won't pull punches, Chris. You know, our website's, I hate it. I just absolutely can't stand it. But there is a tutorial in there about gallop outs. I've got 6 videos that I've wanted to do, and I just never have time, so I never do it. But I do have a tutorial on gallop outs. And as a horse player, you have to watch gallop outs, and you have to know what it is that you're watching. Don't be the 20 handicap that's going to the driving range that has no clue what he's doing when he goes to pound balls. You have to know what it is that you're looking for, but you have to do the work and watch them. And I break it down into several different kind of segments. One is horse comfort. Pace is a big one. Surfaces are another one. What are the others? Cadence, horse's cadence, and then the actual jockey itself. If you want me to spend a bunch of time on this, I will. I think it's worth it. But
yeah, please give us some.
Okay. So
I think.
So first things first. The gallop out is an extension of the trip, and people need to understand that. So when people say, "Oh, I don't give it," who cares what the horse did after the race? He had all the time in the world during the race, and that's just total nonsense. I don't look at it at all. I think it's nonsense. That's a bad opinion, and I'm comfortable saying, like, look, you need to reevaluate and pivot because it isn't meaningful, and I'll tell you why. The gallop out is an extension of the trip itself. That's all that it is. It's an extension of the trip itself. Or are you going to bet against every last horse that had a good trip? No, you're not. You're not going to bet against every last horse that had a good trip. Are you going to bet on every horse that had a bad trip? No, you're not going to do that either. This is a gallop out. It's one piece of the puzzle, and you need to consider it. And it's an extension of the trip. So the first thing is the pace. So if you've done the work and you're acutely aware of the pace dynamic, that is going to paint a picture for what the gallop out should or should not look like. For example, let's say a horse is running in a race that's evenly paced. Okay. So if I say, all right, Chris, we're going to go run a mile. Okay. What's your target? You say, I'm going to even pace. I'm going to try and go two miles. And I say, okay, well, the best way to do, or rather 2 miles at, let's say 10 minutes. So I'm going to go run for 20 minutes. I say, all right, that's 8 laps on a track. Okay, so every lap you're going to run in 2.5 minutes. What's the best way for you to do that, Chris? So it's not rhetorical. Answer the only answer. So if I say you're going to run 2 miles, what's the best way for you to hit your target?
Probably even.
It's going to be an
pace.
Even pace, right? You're going to go, okay, well, I'm going to run.
I can actually hit the target. Yeah.
Assuming you can hit the target, you're going to go, okay, well, I've got to keep up a 2.5 minute pace for every lap. That's probably what you're going to come up with. Or if I say it's a mile, you're going to say, okay, I've got to run 2.5 minutes for 4 laps. Okay, that's going to get me to a 10-minute mile. That's the best way for you to get to your 10-minute mark, right? So that's an even pace. If you run the first 2 laps in 2 minutes, you're going to stop. You're going to be tired. And you're going to be feeling some burn, and then you're in your head, and then it becomes a war, like, oh, I've got to keep going, right? I'm slowing down, but I've got to keep fighting. I've got to keep fighting, or I'm never going to get to my target. And the same can be said for in reverse. If you run the first couple laps in 3 minutes, you're going to have to fly home. Those last 2 laps in 2 minutes apiece, it's not going to happen. You're going to have to sprint, so the best way to do it is an even pace. If there's an even pace in a race, the chances are good that the horses after the race are all going to have a similar amount of energy, right? So those horses should all gallop out similarly, right? Because the pace was even. The closers, the front runners, they all had a dynamic that should allow them a good amount of energy post-race, right? So if you're watching that gallop out and you've done the work and you know that the pace was even, and that's why I don't even bother looking at gallop outs most of the time unless I'm acutely aware of the pace. But if, let's just say in this example, an even pace, most of the horses are going to gallop out evenly after the race. That's the way it should look like. You get the horse that flees the scene on the gallop out in an evenly paced race, that's a big deal. It's actually kind of a huge deal. He's got to leave the pack, but if he does, that horse had probably more to offer and wasn't allowed to prove it because maybe he's a closer in an evenly paced race, right? So that's worth noting. If the pace is fast and the race backs up and you get a closer that gallops out and he leaves the scene, I could care less. Who cares? That's what I think people make the mistake of. They look at the gallop out and they go, oh, the horse galloped out in front. Oh, look, next time he came back, it didn't run well. Okay, maybe that's an extension of the trip. They backed into him that day. He just kept, they were slowing down as he was trying to finish. Of course, it's going to accentuate his gallop out. But it's the trip that you should be looking at anyway. They went fast that day. He benefited. You should have downgraded him anyway. He certainly shouldn't be upgrading his gallop out because he flies past a bunch of tired horses, right? So the pace dynamic is huge in gallop outs. And a lot of times that happens in both, the surfaces. So you have to be aware. Let me back up a minute. Fast-paced horses, they should be willing to get tired. You should allow them a pass if they don't gallop out well. If they do gallop out well and they did all kinds of dirty work and they still lead, that's important. You should make note of that because horses should get tired and they should be passed on the gallop out if they do a ton of work early, right? So the winner of the Preakness yesterday, he didn't get tired on the gallop out. He actually galloped out kind of well. He went very fast early, dueled in between. He should have probably backed up, and he didn't. I missed because I'm stupid, and I lost the race. But he was one horse where I was like, you know what? I don't think he's going to have any problem getting this distance, even though it was one turn. And it was all based on, the dirty work in combination with the gallop out. He went fast. He should have backed up probably a little bit, and he was still going pretty good after the race. So that's important. So pace is big. The surface is big. Typically turf races, they're running upside down a lot of times. So you've got to be aware of that. Most turf races are going to be more vanilla on the gallop out because they tend to run more evenly than dirt races. Dirt races are descending, like we talked about earlier. So that's important. But you have to be willing to spend the extra 20 seconds. You might get a horse that has a perfect pocket trip. And he does everything right. Horse that's stalking drifts a little bit. He slingshots right into the front at the top of the lane and moves away by a length and a half, 2 lengths, and wins the race. If you stop the race there and don't watch anymore, you're going to downgrade that horse probably. You're like, I need a perfect trip. But if you I can't tell you how many times I've seen a perfect pocket trip winner on turf, and you let the tape roll, and he runs off by a pole. Like, he's so far in front, and you're like, wow, okay, I'm actually going to upgrade this horse. It's not his fault that he got a great ride and a great trip, but I can tell you this much. He had a ton more to offer than he did. I don't care that, he had a good trip. He had more fuel in the tank, and that's what you're looking for. So, things like the surface is big. Again, turf races are generally more competitive on the Gallop out, but it depends on the pace dynamic. The jockey is big. The best example that I think I talk about on the video on our site is, let's say you've got a very short race and you've got 2 different jockeys, and let's say it's a 4.5 furlong sprint at Keeneland. It's one of the first ones of the year. And you've got an apprentice riding one horse, and you've got, hypothetically, let's say you've got an apprentice riding one horse, and the same horse is ridden by Joel Rosario, right? So let's say the horse started 2 different times for 2 different jockeys. Joel's going to hold that horse up on the Gallop out. That horse isn't getting away from him. The guy's a brick, what house, and he's strong. So that horse isn't getting away from him on the Gallop out, But let's say you've got an apprentice who's 17 years old and is a finesse rider, and he's in front by 6, and he's whipping and slashing to the wire because he's excited because he's going to win, and he runs off on the Gallop out, and he can't pull the horse up as well. Like, it's important to know that, like, who your rider is. Like, I can tell you which riders literally stand up on the Gallop out. They stand tall. I don't know if they're tired, but they water ski a little bit. Like, that horse isn't going to gallop out well when you're water skiing. So you have to be aware of who the jockey is and what they're like, the jockey's intentions. So sometimes you get riders literally niggling at horses and asking them to run through the Gallop out. And they literally ask them all the way until the horse gets to the front. And then they finally shut it down. They want that horse to know, hey, it's your job to get in front. That's an important one, because that is not coming from the jockey. That's coming from the trainer. Right? Jockeys aren't going to do that on their own. He's had instructions to do that. So you have to watch the Gallop out for that. Like, hey, today's not the goal. It's too short today. But give him a good Gallop out. Try and get him to the front if you can. And let's get him fit for next time. And that's what you're seeing. You might see a rider literally, open their hands up and give them those hand cues like, hey, you're not done. Everyone else is done. You need to keep going. And, so that's important as well. The cadence is big. It takes a little bit more skill on the cadence. Like, you can almost, like, it's like a beat, like a heartbeat or something in music where you can, like, go, click, 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 click. And you're almost counting how fast these strides are coming. And you can tell, and if you get good at it, you can tell which horses are still running and which horses are actually, they're slowing down. A lot of times you get a horse and I know some very skilled handicappers, and they'll say, oh, this horse galloped out great. And I go, okay. And then I bring up the tape. Common Gallop out to me. It just so happened that he was well in front of the others because the others were buried and tired, and his cadence is pretty average. Click, 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 and he's slowing down, but because he's just better than the other animals, it's accentuating his gallop out. And it, it's kind of more hollow than it is everything. It's pretty vanilla. And you got to understand too, the big thing is that most of these gallop outs, they're going to be vanilla, just like trips. Most of the trips that you watch, they're going to be rather common. And most of the gallop outs are going to be common. But when you find the good ones, it's gold, because gallop outs aren't being tracked into any CAW models that I know of. And it's a tell. You might have a jockey that keeps after his horse. That horse is going to be good on the stretch out. And maybe there's some models that say, okay, well, pedigree suggested that. Anyway, that's fine. But from a subjective point of view, that's not going to show up on the tote board. That horse's running line might look more vanilla. That's built into the model too. You can gain kind of an edge that way. So all that stuff. And then the last one I would say would be the horse's comfort level on the gallop out. What does he look like? Is he standing tall? Is he tired, and is he sulking? And horses get tired. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It can kind of just be average if a horse doesn't look great on the gallop out. But when you see a horse that's standing tall and he's got his ears forward, even if he's not leaving the pack, and the turn comes and boom, he switches leads nicely without a problem. There's no hesitation. He's fit. And he's dead fit, and you can see it in him. He looks like King Kong. That's worth noting as well. Not every gallop out is because a good gallop out is because a horse is leaving the pack. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. But you have to be willing to look at that horse and assess what he looks like after the race. Post-race information is huge. So you shouldn't be spending the minute and 10 seconds or $1.35 or whatever it is, the length of time that it takes to watch the replay without watching after the race. That just makes no sense at all. Unless, of course, you've got poor production and you can't see it, which does happen a lot. But it's super important in my opinion. And again, echo again, it's just an extension of the trip. Do you bet every good trip or bet against every good trip? No. Do you bet every bad trip? No. But they're there and they're important, and they paint a picture, and it's definitely a puzzle piece into their next race.
So here's a question for you. Can you give, are there times when the horse looks bad on a gallop out, but that might actually be an indicator that the horse is going to run better next time? It's sort of a leading question because I have an example. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so, look, yes is the answer. But that's more of a handicapping thing, I think, than it is a tell of it. You're combining the information that you see with the handicapping. So maybe the horse needs a race. He's been off for a while, for example, and he's not fit. He doesn't gallop out well. That could actually be a bonus moving forward. Like, okay, I know he's not fit. He needed that race. So you're assessing, in my opinion, the information that you saw with what you see on paper, right? So that's what I would say to that. And then you got some horses that just yeah, okay,
yeah. That was my example. No, just yeah.
See, I think you're just you're combining what you see with what you see on paper. I do my best. I don't make picks, that, right? I do my best to upgrade and downgrade performances based on their previous race, to nudge forward, to give a big push forward, or in reverse, to pull back a horse and say, okay, everything cut his way. That's why he ran that fast, and then you assess. I could make so much more money making picks, and I won't do it. I just won't do it. So I try not to handicap when I write. I do my best to let people decide for themselves. Horse playing to me is a beautiful thing. It's a worthy pursuit. I think the sport's amazing, and I think people should be intellectual about it. And that's what keeps people around. That's what makes fans in the long term, I think, is that, if you're going to become a regular horse player, even if it's, once a month, but you're regular, you go, then I think you should be intellectual about it. I think you should come up with your own opinions. And I try and help people to get there and to develop those opinions, but I don't want to make picks for people. And that's why I try not to handicap when I write my notes. A good example of that might be a horse that had a good trip that I know wants to lead. And I might say, hey, he had a good trip, but he didn't. It's kind of against his running style. He broke a little bit slow, so he took to the pocket. He held the pocket the whole way, and he folded. Was it a good trip? Yes, and I may downgrade him for that. But I'll typically write that into my note, and I'll say, yes, this was a good trip. And I might have a mild downgrade or a downgrade, because the trip is the trip. I want people to know that, this is what happened. But I don't want to handicap for people. So when you start combining things that you talked about, that's where me and Trip Note Pros that's where we draw the line. Is I try my best to not just give my opinion and handicap. And if I'm being totally honest, I don't even like upgrading and downgrading horses. But I know people want it. And so I do it. But I don't like it. I wish I could just write about it, and because people, they don't like to read. It's just, horse players are so lazy, like, oh, it takes too much time. Okay, fine. But it took me 12 minutes. It's going to take you 20 seconds to get through that replay. And they still want, I know what they want. And so I do it that way in terms of the upgrading and the downgrading, but I'm doing my best to not handicap.
Okay, we will pause right there. That's the end of part 1 of episode 27 of the Bet with the Best podcast, with the Trip Note Pros Ryan Flander talking to us about watching races and taking trip notes. I hope you enjoyed it and you learned something, and please stay tuned, because we will be dropping part 2 of this pod again very soon. Until then, may you boldly go where no horse player has gone before.